All right. So I took off another 3 weeks, mostly because I wasn't studying, and that was a thing. So aside from getting back on the horse, I got on here to talk about or some shocking news. Shocking almost news. There we go. Or soon to be news. I'll insert a clickbait title here. So, right. April 2026 just changed everything for work visa holders in Japan. Sorta. But Japan is in the process of changing visa requirements, and it is interesting. Firstly, for most people, the biggest shock has been the visa fees going up massively. But those haven't been approved, as they have to up the caps first and then update the new fee structure. So all of that is speculation as of right now, but suffice to say it's a big jump for most and an unpleasant surprise to move from 6,000 yen to what could possibly be 70,000 yen. Now, before I get screamed at in the comments, let's break that down to see what the proposed numbers are for which is 1 year is for 30,000 yen, 3 years for 60,000 yen, and 5 years for that jaw dropping 70,000 yen. Now, the supposed reason is to get in line with fees in other countries, but I'll be honest that I think that's bunk. The jump, once again, is big, and the way that visas work could be a massive money sink that people aren't prepared for, especially with how fast it seems they want to implement it. Literally, from a reasonable payment to what could amount to a rent payment for many people. And I know that other countries are more expensive, and I'll say straight up, I think that those are more expensive than they should be as well. But basically, I think this is a tactic to discourage hiring. If it does go through in the way without a solid plan of raising to like that number, like gradually or something, because to do it this way is very burdensome, especially because it is a massive hike. And I mean, it even has me thinking about my future in Japan as a long term resident, just because it's so, I don't want to say out of nowhere, but just so much so quickly. Moving on, because this is not really what I wanted to focus on for this, I want to talk about the other proposed change that will cause some friction. And that is more people, or forcing more people, to take language tests to prove their ability. Now, as of right now, there are no language requirements to get a visa, but Japan wants to change that, especially for its most common visa, which is Engineer Specialist in Humanities. They say it will only focus on jobs that would require Japanese, such as translation or customer facing jobs, but there isn't much transparency on how that is decided. There is a mention of category 3 and 4 jobs, which are small companies or startups. And to be fair, I fall under that without giving away too much information. But my work explicitly doesn't require Japanese. So we'll see how that shakes out under the new rules. Now, what makes this a little weird for me is the requirement is CEFR B2, which, if you know, you know. But if you don't know, it's the European framework. And it's weird to me because that's not necessarily what we talk about in the Japanese language community. We focus on the JLPT, or the Japanese language proficiency test levels, just in case. But for the purposes of this, and I know others have talked about it, the equivalent of CEFRB2 is into, according to the JLPT website. And at first, it was thought that only the JLPT would be the only, sorry, at first it was thought the only way to do this would be through the JLPT. And then they added some stuff like, for example, having long term residency of 20 years, which I guess at that point they think you have good Japanese, or graduating from a Japanese university. They did add one other test, and I don't want to say it's helpful, maybe less restrictive is the word I'm looking for. And that is that they added the BJT, or the Business Japanese Proficiency Test, which has more test dates, meaning you can take it almost any day, and you'll receive your test scores faster. Literally, you'll know at the end of your test period what you got and be able to get the certificate like 3 days later. It's still 8,000 yen to take it, and it has a cooldown period of about 3 months between when you can take tests. So if you fail, right, you have to wait 3 months. And I'm sure most people are familiar with the JLPT and its three areas of focus, right? Language, knowledge, reading, and listening. On the other hand, the BJT is technically three parts too: listening, combined listening, reading, and lastly, reading by itself. And there, the major difference is the scores aren't separated into different parts. Instead, it's a score system from 0 to 800 points, and then your level is decided based on that, i.e., the less points, the lower the level. The thing that gets me about the BJT is that it doesn't just test your language knowledge, it also tests office etiquette. It has a focus on Keigo, and some of these things are kind of, let me put it this way: Japanese offices are kind of changing. And so I don't know if these rules will be as applicable as the BJT would like them to be. A more modern company, maybe you don't need it. But I guess if you want to work in Japan on business, it's good to have. Now, to be honest, for test taking purposes, I think it's great that there is more than just the JLPT to take for this kind of official stance. But this also has its own set of barriers, such as places offered. It's offered in fewer countries. I think, for example, it's not offered in the US. And this is strictly computer based testing, which could be a deal breaker for some people. But the ability to take the BJT more often, once again, every day, is nice, I suppose. I guess the question comes down to availability for language learners, which has become pretty strict considering the JLPT will no longer allow people visiting Japan to take it, and the BJT isn't as widespread as the JLPT. So I'm in Japan, and like, which one will I take? Well, I've already taken the JLPT once for N3, and I'll be honest, I didn't pass it by like a few points. So I'm leaning towards taking the JLPT again, probably two times. Another at level N3, and then my desired N2. I think that equivalent BJT is 400 points should you want to go that route. But I think that you have to consider how much you need Keigo and Japanese business manners, which, to be honest, I do not. I need language and, of course, culture. But I'm not planning on working for a Japanese company anytime soon, especially an old fashioned one. Uh, Looking back over this, my opinion is that I'm not sure a requirement will work out the way the government wants it to, or if the government particularly cares. I do know this will increase the amount of test takers, which is good for these companies. And even in my case, where I shouldn't be affected by the requirement, I'm still going to try and achieve it just in case. But I do worry about what switching to purely JLPT study will do to my speaking skills. Because a major part or thing about this test is the lack of a speaking portion, which shouldn't be much of a problem if you live in the language. But I can see myself neglecting speaking to try to absorb the sheer amount of grammar. And that brings me back to some of my reservations with this requirement. I know people who have passed the JLPT N2, even a few passed the N1, who are still too nervous or can't speak well, mostly because they studied for the test and didn't really, I guess, absorb anything else. And this hits on something that I have found which made me a better speaker, and that is correctness versus communication. And like, so that's, being obsessed with being right over being understood. Or in this case, test taking is going to punish you for being incorrect. And I think this causes problems with speaking in a lot of ways. Because for speaking, you have to get out of your comfort zone and focus on being understood. And when you do that, you can make mistakes. In fact, in some cases, mistakes are glossed over just to like get to the understanding. Because, right, if they don't understand you, they should just ask you to repeat like the other person, right? So, what does this mean? I think this means that more people do need to study for the test, for better or worse. And I think that people need to think about things like speaking on their own terms more. And the best way to improve your speaking is probably things like shadow or at least some kind of input training, which, fair warning, will make your mouth tired at first, but I promise it's good for you. Speaking of needing to talk more, I think I said before, but I will try to speak more Japanese in these videos as opposed to just explaining what and how I'm doing. mostly just as a way to make sure I'm getting my output time. And so you'll probably hear like some maybe audio of me speaking Japanese, or I might add more Japanese into the video itself. Uh, Maybe set up a Japanese introduction. There's some things that I could do to like improve and increase my Japanese speaking. But that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I know that it probably doesn't affect people who listen to my videos so much, or maybe it does, but it's something I really wanted to talk about. So, thanks and see you guys in the next video.